Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Rival Recon here on Anfield Index Pro. The Reds rediscovered their identity and collective ethos yesterday as they defeated Pep Guardiola's Manchester City side at Anfield in front of a raucous crowd. Once again, Mo Salah would have the final word. But with the games coming thick and fast at present, our attention now turns to the midweek game as West Ham arrive at Anfield looking to halt Liverpool's progress. All eyes will be on the Reds and whether they can capitalise on the win against the champions and finally build some momentum this season. Joining me on the pod to share his perspective on West Ham's evolution under David Moyes and the heap of exciting new signings made this summer by the Hammers, I'm delighted to welcome on West Ham writer for Football London, Jonty Colman. Welcome on, Jonty.
Thank you very much for having me on, Harry.
No, good to speak with you. I mean, the games are coming thick and fast. This one nearly caught me out, with the with the quick turnaround. I've said that a few times this season already. As we sort of barrel closer to this oddly odd in many ways World Cup that we're about to sort of go through, I guess. But what I wanted to talk to you about today is obviously West Ham. And last season, whenever I got the guests on to talk about the Hammers, it was a pretty interesting discussion. Really. Almost in some episodes, it felt like quite unprecedented in terms of sort of the work that David Moyes had been putting in there. Obviously, a 7th place finish in the Premier League, semi-finals of the Europa League, quarterfinals of the EFL Cup. That's a successful campaign, and you've got Jared Bowen scoring 18 in all competitions. A team really seemed to be evolving under David Moyes as well. Just wanted to ask you, I mean, in your opinion, sort of covering the club, what were your overarching thoughts on sort of where they were come the end of the season? Because I was looking at the fixtures and just looking at the results, and I'd sort of like it's sort of gone past me a little bit that actually the end of the season perhaps wasn't as great in the league because of sort of maybe the European pursuits.
Yeah, no, obviously, it was from the outside looking in, it was a fantastic achievement. I mean, David Moyes took charge for the second time at West Ham about just shy of 3 years ago now. And when he inherited that team, they were 4th bottom in the Premier League, and they're fighting to stay in the division. Fast forward it to now, and it's been a 6th and a 7th place finish in the last 2 seasons. Two brilliant campaigns. Last season, as you mentioned, there Europa League semi-finals as well, and they were very close to being in the final. Had a brilliant run, knocked out some big teams in the likes of Lyon and Sevilla in Europe, and had a brilliant campaign. They're really fighting not just for top 6 but top 4 as well. And as you mentioned there, their form sort of dropped off towards January, February. But for them, it was a case of sort of one or two injuries to key players and not having quite the depth that perhaps the bigger clubs are used to with playing in European competitions, all these matches and that kind of thing, where they've got sort of 2 sets of 11 and plenty of squad players and they can rotate it and been prepared for these injuries. And whereas West Ham, it was largely unchanged. There weren't too many changes for these games, and that's something that they've looked at this summer. But it's obviously a fantastic achievement. And the message from the club's been, we don't want this to just been 2 good seasons. We want this to be long-term, sustained success. We're in a massive stadium. They're in London, one of the biggest city in the country, and the big clubs are all coming out of these massive cities. And while Arsenal, Tottenham and Chelsea, are 3 massive clubs already in London, West Ham want to be on par with them. So they've tried to make strides towards that this summer with the money they've spent, and a lot of money as well. But if you look at the quality of player they've signed, you can't really say they've kind of been ripped off, really. Last 2 seasons have been brilliant achievements, but in that the message from the club and what they're aiming towards is they don't just want that to be sort of a fluke or 1 or 2 good seasons. They want this to be a long-term sustained success, and they want to build and just keep growing as a club.
Yeah, obviously, we'll come on to talk about sort of the players that have come through the door and the quality of those players as well. One point I did want to sort of ask you though was, come the end of last season, who were those key players that you thought sort of really inspired the run that the club had in the league and also in the Europa League? Obviously, I mentioned one there in terms of sort of Jared Bowen and his goals. Mikel Antonio will be one that sort of comes to mind for people who maybe have just caught West Ham highlights from now and then. But who are the players that you sort of look at and think deserve a lot of praise for the way in which they inspired the club on last season?
As you mentioned, I don't think anyone really can be mentioned probably more than Jared Bowen, especially in the second half of the season. His goals were so important. West Ham, had, like I sort of alluded to, their form had dropped off. But had it not been for Bowen's goals, I think a lot of his 18 came in the second half of the last season. West Ham might have not got the success they got. He scored not just a lot of goals, but in big games. He scored a lot of goals in Europe, and on top of that, he scored, I think, they played Man City towards the end of last season and got a 2-2 draw, and Bowen got both goals in that game. And, he just came out with trumps in big games like that. And, it's no wonder that he's now in the England squad. He's been linked with, bigger clubs as a potential transfer target. And, so he's obviously someone that you think West Ham, and he's one of the first names you associate with the team. Declan Rice as well, he's obviously been brilliant in midfield, such a, one of the sort of key cogs for England, and has been, in that run to the final of the European Championships, and he's been a regular sort of in the build-up to that and ever since, really. So, again, West Ham always seem to be playing their best football with those two players in. Antonio as well, as you mentioned there last season, he was their only sort of natural number 9, if you like. They had sort of makeshift options of Bowen or like one or other of the 4 players they sort of used there. But yeah, Antonio had to play a lot of football last season, and they had to rely on him. They could rely on him, to be fair. He gave it his all. What we got to understand is, like, a few years ago he wasn't a striker. It's something that sort of West Ham he's kind of moulded into during his time at West Ham. He'd mainly been sort of a winger or even at times a fullback prior to his days at West Ham. So, credit to him. I think he's had ahead of a season, I think it's 3 straight seasons of scoring 10 Premier League goals in each campaign. And, for, as I say, someone who's sort of converted, not necessarily a natural striker, and last season obviously had to be relied upon in other European games as well. And then, the Thursday, Sunday, most weeks, fair play to him. But yeah, Kurt Zouma as well, another one him and Craig Dawson at the back had such an important impact on the team last season. And we've seen signs of that as well in the early parts of this season. So yeah, those are ones, the sort of core players you look at, and they have added to that in the summer. And we're starting to see sort of now the quality and the money we've spent and why they've spent it exactly. But yeah, there are some very, very good players in there, as I mentioned. And, it's kind of perhaps easy to see why West Ham are, you think of the big 6, and when you think of the teams straight after them, and West Ham's now, but off the last 2 seasons, they're kind of the first ones you think of because of their success. Yeah,
and I think, looking at some of those players that you just mentioned there, I think it's clear to see the evolution that they've been on as well in terms of sort of their own development at the club alongside sort of the team developing as well. In terms of sort of come the end of the season, actually Dawson was a player who actually came up time and time again. Actually, it was quite funny to see sort of the way in which he's having his renaissance, I think. But in terms of sort of come the end of the season, you mentioned there was a real desire at the club not to make this a flash in the pan, to build for long-term sustained success. Where were the positions that you thought, and you think the fans were thinking, these are the positions if we really want to compete, not just the depth that we need in the squad, but the sort of specific positions where West Ham needed to sort of level up? And then we'll dive into that, sort of talking about the actual players who've come through the door afterwards.
In terms, it's a combination. So I think there was some areas where we could have quality, but I think it was a combination of depth and quality. Players that could come in and do a job in the first team, players that could, a lot of the signings they've made are quite versatile. Actually, they're not just quality players, but they're quality players you can use in a few different positions. I met like the likes of Tino Kehrer, Lucas Paqueta, Maxwell Cornier. They're just a few examples of players they've signed this summer who can all play in sort of a variety of positions. In terms of where needed to be strengthened, I think they made a big purpose to sort of add him a number 10 position, which they have done with signing Lucas Paqueta, the sort of biggest signing of the summer, which at the time seems like a really it's sort of perhaps a bizarre bit of business in the sense that, he's linked with so many big clubs, Arsenal and Newcastle were the two that sort of, stood out, but there are other clubs he's linked with as well. And, for him to end up at West Ham just shows the level they've got to as well. So that was looked at. Up front was looked at as well. They spent big money on signing Gianluca Scamacca from Sassuolo. A centre back as well. We also spent big money on signing Neif Agard from Ligue 1. So although we haven't actually seen him play yet, so yeah, they've spent big money. But if you sort of break down each deal, look at where they fit in, it does make sense. And while 160 million sounds an awful lot of money for a club like West Ham, it really is. But they signed 8 players, eight good quality players. A lot of them, almost all of them actually, are internationals of their country. Plenty with top level experience as well. Some there's a bit of a blend. Some sort of younger ones that they look and see potential in. So yeah, there's a lot of money spent, but there's pressure on sort of making them sort of succeed and bed themselves into this West Ham team, and we are starting to see that. I think it's helped, but they've had the Europa Conference League playing alongside, not just in the groups, but be able to play 2 qualifying games as well to get into the groups. So again, I think that's really helped in some ways of getting those sort of players getting minutes and getting them sort of used to life at West Ham, especially the ones coming from sort of foreign leagues that never played sort of English football before. So yeah, a lot of money spent, but you can see why they've done it, and it's one of those where they're kind of banking on having another good season. But with players they've signed, you kind of, it's been a slow start, but you kind of back them long term to succeed, especially with sort of the talent they've acquired at a club.
It's an interesting case, yeah. I think whenever you sort of see an outlay like that of 160 odd million, 8 players coming in, I mean, usually the things that get leveled at clubs that do that is that too many players? Is it going to take a bit too long to be able to integrate that many players, and then sort of the time it takes, then you sort of maybe lose out on the points that you would have thought you would have maybe gained in the first half of the season, for example. But then also, I've spoken to West Ham fans, West Ham journalists in the past, and they've mentioned West Ham spending big, but in the past perhaps it was more a approach that was focused on names. Maybe sort of the more flashy profile of players that they could attract, rather than players of the right quality that actually fit the dynamic, fit the team, fit the role that they were coming in to play, fit the league as well. It sounds like from what you said there that you actually you're feeling confident that with these players, as well as sort of pursuing quality at the right age, they're also the right fit for this team as well.
Yeah, I think if you break all 8 down, I mean, in goal you've got Alphonse Areola, who's come in on a permanent deal. We obviously had him as backup last season, and he played all the cup games and all the European games. And Lucas Fabianski's obviously a brilliant keeper, but he is 37, so you don't know how much longer sort of you got of him. Although he put in a brilliant performance yesterday, actually against Southampton. But to have Areola, he's a regular in the France squad. Albeit he doesn't play a lot for France, but the fact he's in the France squad, I think, speaks volumes. And the fact that he's West Ham's second goalkeeper, is pretty staggering, really. In defensive side, Tilo Kehrer, he played a lot of minutes for PSG in recent seasons. I think I saw a stat around the time he signed. I think since Hansi Flick's become the Germany manager, I think Tilo Kehrer has had more minutes than any other German outfield player for the country, which is quite, you think of the talent Germany have in their squad. Tilo Kehrer might not necessarily be a name that you instantly think of, but the fact that he's getting a lot of minutes for his country, speaks volumes, I think. And the beauty of him is he's got top level experience. He can play anywhere across the back line. And, he's had to this season already due to injuries and other factors. Neif Agard, he done a brilliant season, I believe it was at Rennes. Was that, he did a good season there. He's a regular with Morocco. I think he played every minute for them at the African Cup of Nations at the start of the season. So yeah, they've got high hopes for him. It didn't help that he suffered a really bad ankle injury in pre-season. He's not played since. He's close to coming back, but he's still a little bit off. There's concerns of getting him back. There's obviously a World Cup in a few weeks, and he will be, if he's fit, he will be in that Morocco squad. So interested to see sort of how he comes on and how he suits when we eventually start to see him. Emerson at left back, it's good competition for Aaron Cresswell, obviously a very experienced and heavily respected player of the club, also vice captain. But Emerson, he's won the Euros with Italy, he's won a lot at Chelsea. played out on loan at Lyon last season as well with Paqueta. So, again, a very experienced player and a very, again, shrewd sign. I think they paid around 13 million for him. So that's the thing. It is 160 million, but when you break all these deals down, it's really not as much. Lucas Paqueta's the star signing in the number 10 role. Played an awful lot for, I think it's about 35 caps for Brazil, and he's only just turned 25. He can play as a number 10. He's played off the left wing. He can play as a false 9 in one of the deep midfield. He's so versatile. He's played, as I say, plays at AC Milan, played at Lyon, and if he has a couple of good years at West Ham, they really see that as such a talented prospect for them. It's on Flynn Downs in central midfield. Perhaps it's an interesting one, central midfield. Flynn Downs had only played sort of one full season last year at Swansea in the Championship, but he's grown up as a West Ham fan. He's from Brentwood, not far from West Ham at all. So there's that element to it as well. And, they see a lot of potential in him. He's kind of very much a project signing. David Moyes, we spoke to him recently, and he sort of mentioned that when he was at Everton, he signed Phil Jagielka and Leighton Baines as projects, and we saw what great players they turned into. And that's kind of what he's aiming for with Downs, really. We've not seen a lot of him yet, mainly in Europe. But again, you kind of see why they've signed him. Maxwell Cornier on the left wing, signed for he obviously had a brilliant season at Burnley last year in a very poor Burnley team, I must add. And, had Burnley not had his goals, they would have been relegated a lot sooner than they were. But again, another versatile player, plays number 9, play off the left wing, play left wing back. Well, actually, I think. He scored some brilliant goals, yeah. We've not seen him yet. They've kind of, that's sort of a one position maybe up for grabs in this West Ham team, that left wing spot. You've got him, you've got Saïd Benrahma, Pablo Fornals, and none of them are quite yet to sort of make it their own yet this season. Cornier had got his full league debut a couple of weeks ago against Wolves, but ended up coming off injured in the first half. We've not seen him since, and he's probably not going to play against Liverpool, although, he either just makes it or just doesn't. But again, you just get why they're signing, I think, 17.5 million. And then the other one, Scamacca, comes off a 17-goal season in Serie A, which is fantastic. He's only 23. He's been a regular in the Italy squad for about a year or so now. So, and yeah, we've started to see, what he can bring. He's already a club's top scorer in all competitions, although a lot of them are coming in Europe, but he has been brilliant. He's been, since coming back from the last international break, he has been West Ham's main striker up front, and you can see why. He's really confident for, I think he's 6'5", but he doesn't move like it. He's got brilliant hold-up play, quick feet. He's a really good. He's a pretty good passer of the ball, especially for someone of his sort of frame as well. So there's a lot to like about him. And even when he's not been scoring goals, you think, they've got a player here. And once they get him fit, and David Moyes has said, he's probably not at his best yet, and that's a really exciting thing. He is still really new to the league, he's still new to the country, but he's already got 6 goals. I think he's averaging a goal about every 100 minutes or so in Europe this season, which is fantastic. And yeah, he's only started 4 Premier League games so far, but he scored in 2 of them. Had a hatful of chances against Southampton yesterday. And another day scores 1 or 2 of them. And the other one was against Villa, where West Ham hardly got a kick before he came off, so you can't really blame him, really. So yeah, 8 signings, a lot of money spent. But when you sort of break it down and look at how much is each player, why they signed that player, it really makes sense.
And then, I guess, given that, and given sort of the enthusiasm that came out of the end of last season, sort of the injection of all these new sort of signings, fans are always going to be sort of very excited about shiny new sort of things to slot into the squad. The way in which the side started the season, did that surprise you at all in terms of sort of, obviously, the opening day game against Manchester City is one of the toughest ones you can always get. But sort of those 3 opening games, the loss to Nottingham Forest, for example, away, but again, newly promoted side like that, like Forest, away from home early in the season, that's when they're going to be at their most dangerous, you'd imagine. But and then a loss to Brighton, who obviously, I think everyone has sort of discovered this season, and Graham Potter's obviously gone over to Chelsea now, but Brighton by no means a side to be underestimated given how they performed so far this season. So, I mean, are there mitigating circumstances for all those games, or was there something worrying that you saw in the start of the season that sort of contributed to those losses?
Combination, it's kind of a few factors. You're right in saying there are mitigating circumstances in some ways, but in other ways there were a few concerns. We'll start with the Man City game. They go into that with one fit centre-back in Kurt Zouma. They had to play Ben Johnson, the young right-back, as a centre-back with Kurt Zouma. And I'm not being funny. We've all seen how good Manchester City have been this season, especially with Erling Haaland. And what West Ham didn't play particularly well. They didn't really offer a lot going forward. Antonio sort of had one half chance in the opening stages, but yeah, there was a few mitigating circumstances. As I said, Ben Johnson had to play centre back. I think for the opening 3 games of the season, if I remember right, he had to play as a centre back in the league anyway. But yeah, in that City game, they'd done really. Fabianski had a good first 25, 30 minutes or so. Erling Haaland clatters into him for a cross. Fabianski goes off injured. 2 minutes later, Haaland goes for a goal, and Areola brings him down in the box 1-0. And from that point on, it was City's game. And West Ham did go for it in the second half, but it was they tried going for it, but they got caught on the break. Haaland goes for a goal 2-0. And I think from memory, they were City's only 2 real clear-cut chances. And a West Ham side were really struggling for players from memory. Some of the signings they had made hadn't quite come in yet. So I think they'd only sort of made 4 or 5 of their signings by that point. They had a couple of players injured and stuff. I think, Craig Dawson injured, Tilo Kehrer hadn't arrived. Issa Diop was actually refusing to play because he was desperate to leave the club, and he left for Fulham a few days later. So there were a lot of mitigating circumstances for that one. The Forest game, as you say there, we go away to a newly promoted side, their first home game in the Premier League in, I think, 22 years or something along those lines. So, that's always going to be a tough test. Forest is a brilliant atmosphere if you've ever been. The City ground's a real cold, and you can tell how excited they were to be back in the top flight. And Forest played all right, but West Ham, on another day, they won that game pretty comfortably. Benrahma had a goal disallowed by VAR. There's a foul by Antonio in the build-up. I think there's 2 cleared off the line. Rice misses a penalty, 2 at the underside of the bar. So, without scoring, they couldn't have got much closer. So, a 1-0 defeat sort of, I think Forest probably deserved a point, but West Ham will certainly would have felt aggrieved that they came away empty-handed that day. And then the Brighton game, as you say, they just didn't play great. And as you say, Brighton have been brilliant this season, especially under Graham Potter, who, of course, is now at Chelsea. But yeah, what I will say on top of that, though, is either side, I think it was before Forest and before Brighton, there are 2 games in Europe. And they're trying to rejig a squad, bled new players in, and they won both of those games in Europe in that time. So there was concern, but when you looked at the European games, you saw Scamacca was starting to get some minutes and a couple of other players, and Scamacca was scoring goals. There was signs that there is room for optimism. I think if it hadn't been for the European games and we had just seen 3 straight defeats in the league, there would be a lot more reason to be concerned. And I think there was a case of, not been a great start, but you could have to start picking up some points. And luckily it's turned around a lot more since then. But after those sort of first few games, there was, plenty of reason to be concerned.
And of the new signings, you mentioned Scamacca and sort of the form he's been in Europe. Which of the new signings have you seen the most of so far, and sort of how excited have they gotten the fans?
In terms of who we've seen the most so far, Tilo Kehrer is probably the one who's played the most minutes. As I mentioned, versatile defender, had to come in at centre-back straight away, really, right within sort of a day or 2 of signing. But again, I think the plus side he had is, I think he played, a couple of pre-season games and stuff, so he was fit when he arrived, which wasn't really the case for a lot of West Ham signings, which again didn't help. So we've seen a lot of Kehrer. I think a lot of people would have been concerned if you sort of look for, I think on his debut against Brighton, he gives away a penalty, which is just a really rash decision. And then he scored an own goal against Tottenham. But when you look at it, it's absolutely not his fault. It's one of those sort of crosses low in the box. And if he doesn't get there, then Son gets a tap in at the back post. You can't really blame him. But in terms of that, barring that, he's so calm on the ball. His positioning, is largely good. But he's very 2-footed. We've mainly seen him play on the right side, but I'm pretty sure he's left-footed. Or if he's not left-footed, then he must have the best sort of like a Santi Cazorla weak foot about him, because he's so comfortable on both feet, and he can play out right back, left back, centre back, and we've seen him, playing in a range of roles already. We've seen a lot of him. Lucas Paqueta has played a lot since he came in. He signed. He's one of the last signings to come into the club. I think it's sort of the last week of the window. So yeah, we've seen a lot of him. I think he started virtually every league game since coming in. I think he made his debut off the bench against Tottenham, but since then started every league game. So we've seen a lot of him, and his first couple of games he wasn't great, but we're now starting to see a more confident play. Some of the tricks he pulls off, the win over Fulham last weekend. He created so many good chances for Paqueta, and he's got a brilliant touch about him. He sort of glides on the ball. There was that clip of him against Anderlecht that went viral where he sort of does this sort of touch where he jumps and like flicks one leg behind the other. You just think, wow, what a player! Like you can see why that I think it was 36 million up front, but it could eventually climb above 50 after add-ons. But you can see why, the quality. And Skamaka as well. We've only started to see him in the league since this international break, but he scores against Wolves with a really well taken goal actually. Scores against Fulham again with a really there's a bit of VAR controversy around it, but the ball's kind of behind him and he managed to take it adjust his feet and then managed to dig Leno from about 25 yards with just this clever little cute side-footed, sort of a lofted pass more than anything. But then we've seen him in Europe just hit one from 25 yards, go in, almost do the same against Southampton from even further back yesterday. So, he looks a really good player, but the club are keen not to put too much pressure on him. The number sort of that striker number 9 role, if you like, it's his for now, but there's definitely no illusion from David Moyes that, if he does have a bad run of form, then he will turn back to Antonio. He's got a trusty player there, but to be fair, if Skamaka keeps playing the way he has done, I don't think Moyes has got to worry about that one for a while. So they're the kind of ones we've seen the most. Downs we've not seen too much of, mainly in Europe. Emerson, we've seen him a couple of times in the league, but again, mainly in Europe. Areola, only in Europe. Agard's been injured, so we've not seen him. And Cornier, again, mainly Europe, but he's injured as well now. So in terms of the best of those 8 signings so far, you look at, Kehrer, Paqueta and Skamaka are sort of the 3 that scream out at me at a minute.
Yeah, sort of excited to see Skamaka in the flesh, actually, and Paqueta as well. I think he's always struck me as a very talented and actually sort of tenacious player whenever I actually managed to sort of see highlights of him playing in France. So interested to see how he does in the Premier League. And in terms of those players, we spoke about integrating them and the challenge that is, when you've got new options, it's obviously gives you the ability to rotate, and that's a very attractive prospect as well for managers who've not had a big squad in the past. But in terms of sort of tactical changes you've seen from David Moyes this season, so far anyway, have there been any noticeable sort of tweaks to the system that you saw last time around?
Are you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AIPRO10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
Not necessarily. I think what we haven't seen West Ham sort of dominate possession too much, and I don't think that that they've kind of built this team, and it's probably the case before with signs as well. But they've built this team really where they've not really had too much of the ball. When we do have the ball, they're very sort of very clinical and purposeful with the ball, and they know what they want to do. As soon as they get it to Rice or Souček, there's an element to try and get it out to a fullback or a wing back and sort of build something straight away. With Paqueta as well now, we've got this sort of player who picks up brilliant positions, and they've got sort of this sort of proper number 10 that is a real luxury player and he can do great things. He's still not quite probably at his best just yet. They've definitely got he definitely had in his early games he's getting trying to take too many touches, and he is sometimes guilty of that, to be fair to him, but it's one of those things you don't mind if he puts in that beautiful cross or plays in that perfect through ball. You don't mind if we know he can do it, and he does still do it, so you can't really blame him for that. But he is still getting used to it. But we've seen the last few games, shown a lot more purpose. He's a lot quicker. I think he thought he probably had too much time on the ball. But again, it's just one of those things where you get used to the Premier League. He's only ever played in, I think, Brazil, Italy and France at club level. So, those things do take a lot of time. They're not just quick fixes. Kehra's slotted in brilliantly. Again, it helps. He's a very technical defender, whereas Zuma and Dawson are a bit more sort of old school. Kehra's, a very sort of technically gifted player who can. They've started using them at right back a bit more now, but when Zuma and Dawson were fit, although there's concerns about both of them actually going into the Liverpool game. But yeah, when he has played at right back, he can he's got the technical quality to get forward, put crosses in and stuff. And yeah, in general, I think they've kind of got it's not necessarily a long ball or anything like that. They're very progressive. When they have the ball, they're quick. They're keen to get it forward. They've got talented wingers, Jarrod Bowen on the right side or whoever it is playing on the left. They've got plenty of options out there. Cresswell and Kufal like to come forward from full back or Kehra, as has been recently on the right, like to come forward from full back and sort of overlap, try and get crosses in. And with Scamacca now, they've got more options to do so, and Paqueta as well. So, he's this big, imposing 6'5" striker who can really occupy defenders, whether it's his hold-up play, whether it's aerial threat, he's kind of got a bit of everything to him, really. He's not sort of one striker as such. He's got a bit of everything about him. So, no, I don't think too much has changed. I think it's just building on what they had and trying to just up it a level with added quality. And yeah, I think they want to make themselves tough to break down first, want to get the ball, get it forward and try and create these goal scoring opportunities and take them. And with players like Bowen and Scamacca and, Antonio, when he does play, they've all got decent goal records, so they hope that, they can do that.
So looking at the actual results that you've had so far this season, I mean, we spoke about some of the mitigating circumstances that could have surrounded the losses at the start of the season, and yeah, I'm conscious that we're still at the start of the season. But in terms of sort of the wins that you've seen so far, I mean, have there been any performances you've looked at and gone, okay, that's probably more indicative of what Moyes envisages this side looking like when things do start to click?
In terms of the Premier League, the winner Aston Villa, which is their first win of the season, I think it's the end of August, didn't play well at all. In actual fact, some of their best performances this season have come where they've dropped points.
Right, okay.
It's quite an interesting one. They've played away at Tottenham. I think it was the day before deadline day. And they drew 1-1 against, Tottenham side who had started the season brilliantly. They did really well. And, it was an own goal on the break that ultimately wasn't 3 points. Thomas Souček gets a good goal off some really, sustained pressure from West Ham. And they had a couple of chances. I think Antonio and Bowen both went close really late on, and they had good chances in that game. They went to Chelsea 3 or 4 days later. Took a lead off a scrappy corner. They take a lead. Chelsea make some good substitutions and bring it back to 2-1. And then there's Maxwell Cordier come off the bench. He hit the post within minutes coming on, and then sort of the last kick of the game scores. It's 2-2. You think that's a brilliant point away at Chelsea, but then it gets ruled out by VAR. Still can't quite get over that decision, to be honest. It was such a shock. But yeah, those two performances stand out. I think they've looked a more complete team since the international break. They've beaten Anderlecht twice in Europe. They beat Wolves, although Wolves didn't offer a lot, but they looked really good. West Ham were pretty solid in that game. And they beat Fulham. I mean, there's probably a lot of controversy. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a lot of controversy surrounding probably all 3 of West Ham's goals last weekend. But, in terms of the way they played, Leno had to make some brilliant saves. Paqueta and Scamacca were linking up fantastic. I think Paqueta makes 4 good chances for Scamacca. And 2 are saved brilliantly. 1 goes in, and the other one I think is just sort of inches wide. So yeah, I'd say they're playing they're starting to play the best football now. Yesterday's game at Southampton, I know they drew, but there's controversy surrounding Southampton's goal. West Ham definitely felt they should have had a penalty, and probably rightly so. And yeah, they didn't have many shots on. I think they had something like 20 or 24 shots, only 4 on target. But the ones that were off target, Paqueta hits a post with a header. Emerson goes close early on. Scamacca has a couple of chances but aren't far off at all, and another one that forces a good save from Bazunu late on. So, yeah, they're they're looking like they're definitely coming into this Liverpool game playing the best football. I think injuries are a major issue. I think it proves to be the difference at Southampton yesterday. They've just got over their centre-back crisis, got pretty much everyone back barring Agard, and then they lose 3 of their 4 that were fit in a matter of days. They only had Kehrer, and again, he's not really. He is a centre. He can play centre back very well, but he's sort of this sort of floating defender who can play sort of anywhere across the back line. Not necessarily a specialist, but capable of playing full free. He was the only sort of centre back they had fit. Obama made the bench, but he'd gone off with a hamstring injury 3 days earlier against Anderlecht. Dawson went off in that game with a dead leg that he'd already had. They were trying to rest him in the Anderlecht game, but Obama comes off to bring Dawson on despite having a dead leg. He then collides into Flynn Downs and sort of re-aggravates that deadlock that he's off. Kazuma's had an illness. So, again, it was sort of a late call whether or not he made Southampton. He didn't make it. So, it's going to be interesting to see whether Zuma or Dawson are back. Because they had to change formation and it didn't really suit them. And I think it was costly at Southampton at the end of the day. They just looked sort of very vulnerable defensively. And, you know, when you're missing Zuma, Dawson and Obama's still not fully fit in, missed the best part of the year and he's only just coming back. And now he's had another setback and we're still not seeing Agard yet. You know, when you've got all of that to deal with, trying to field a Premier League defence with one sort of centre-back available isn't easy at all. So, yeah, I think, you know, West Ham could give Liverpool a good game with everyone fit. It's just a case of what team they're going to have, just of the issues they've got on the back at the minute, and structurally how they can play and what options they actually have. If they've got enough to go back to their 4-2-3-1, then yeah, you back them to have a better chance. If it has to play this sort of back 3, back 5 that's forced and it's got full-backs playing in a central role, you know, that's when you worry, especially with, you know, the plethora of attacking talent Liverpool have. Yeah,
no, I think you don't need to say too much for me to actually sort of give you sympathy around sort of centre-backs injury crisis and sort of trying to play games where you can't really field a centre-back is not something I really want to go back to be honest. No. Again, like it was just like seeing Jordan Henderson play centre-back, it wasn't good. Yeah. Wasn't a fun time.
For context, they had so played Anderlecht on Thursday night in the second game. They beat them 1-0 in their first group game. Played them a week later, week just gone, and they started with as I mentioned about the Obama Dawson situation. But for the last 15 minutes, luckily they're 2-0 up. But the last 15 minutes, we had a back 3 of Ben Johnson, Declan Rice, and Emerson as a back 3, and you know, so yeah, not great. But yeah, they'll just hope that one of, if not both, of Zuma and Dawson are back, because if they are, it makes such a difference, I think, both in terms of their quality and the way that West Ham are able to play.
No, of course, and we'll get onto the Liverpool game in a second, just to sort of talk about what you expect for that. But in terms of expectations then for the season, it's an interesting one, because you mentioned sort of there, we discussed the influx of new signings coming in, quality, exciting players. You talk about the 6th place finish, the 7th place finish, the European adventure last season, getting into semi-finals of the Europa League. I mean, what are the current expectations, you think, amongst the fan base in terms of both what they can do in the league campaign, but also are there more European dreams around sort of how far you can go in that competition once again?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of element of you know, it was a good run in Europe, but they would have liked to have gone one further. Got to final and B, win the tournament, and you know, they really weren't far off doing that. And obviously they've dropped down a competition now from the Europa League to Europa Conference League. But I think West Ham were sort of made favourites, or one of the favourites, to win this competition right at the start of the season before a ball was kicked. And since then they've won both their qualifying games pretty comfortably. They've won 4. They've gone 4 wins in 4 in the group. So they're already through to the knockout rounds. But if they get a point in either of their last 2 games, they go. The way the Conference League works is it's not like the Champions League where the top 2 go through and it's just around the 16. Sorry, the top team goes through. So they go straight to the round of 16. But if you finish second, you have to play the 3rd place team from the Europa League, like a playoff. So from sort of a fixture point of view, a financial point of view, it makes it a lot easier if you finish top. Luckily for West Ham, they've been that good in that competition this season, but they only need a point from their last 2 games to do that. So, but I think the way they've basically fielded B teams, really, with this sort of depth they've got now. They've been making sort of 8-9 changes a game, and you look at a team and you think, that 11's probably played a Premier League game together or close to it. So that's the beauty of sort of the depth they've got now. I think in Europe, they really want to go, as I said, they're one of the favourites in this competition and they're doing really well in it so far. So they'll hope that they'll go all the way and win that. In terms of the Premier League, I think obviously it's so tough, isn't it? We're playing Thursday, Sunday, which, almost all of their games this season have been on Sunday rather than Saturdays because they've got a European game right before it. So it's minimal preparation for a lot of these games. It's really tough. I mean, I don't know the numbers exactly, but if you look at sort of points picked up by teams, by sort of like West Ham, Man U, Arsenal, clubs that we've seen playing Thursday night football in recent seasons, it's not bound to be awfully high. So it is tough. It's a challenge for them, but I still think the money they've spent, I think that the hope is that they get European football again next season or failing that as close to that as possible, possibly a run in 1 or 2 cups as well. But I think, if you get this brilliant run in Europe and the sort of a top 7 finish again, then fair play, that would be a brilliant season.
And there's some individual records inside as well. I think for a couple of these West Ham players as well, actually, to become, I think I saw that Jared Bowen's close to becoming maybe the all-time all-time sort of goal scorer in Europe. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Sort of his records,
yeah. So he scored. He scored the opener against Anderlecht on Thursday, and that puts him joint top now. I think there's 2 others, but from a very long time ago, sort of like when West Ham was sort of a more of a European team, like back in yesteryear. But the fact is, Bowen only made his European debut 13 months ago. So the sort of progression, and he's already joint all-time top scorer in Europe. It's brilliant. David Moyes did make the point that you've got to kind of contextualise it a bit, and obviously now like the groups and the way that European competitions work, you play a lot more games in Europe when you are in it. But even still, it's a brilliant achievement. I think he's only played 13 European games and he's got 6 goals, and he's not a striker either. So yeah, it's brilliant from him really, and I think it shows a sign that his goal threat, and he's had it really for a lot of years now. Funnily enough, one of my old jobs, before I started covering West Ham, was I used to cover Hull, and it was Bowen's last season at Hull, and he was so good. He's been linked with, I think, about 14 Premier League clubs he got linked with before he left. I think, including Arsenal, and so yeah, we always knew this Premier League move was going to come for him, and he didn't start amazingly quick. I think he only got 1 goal in his first sort of half season at West Ham, but since then he's been brilliant. Played a big role in getting the 6th place finish first. Then last season, top scorer, as you say, of 18 goals, and getting him into 7th, but into the semi-finals of Europe as well, which is fantastic.
He's had plenty of admirers. I think at one stage there were quite a few sort of rumours around sort of his admirers at Liverpool as well. Actually, I think in terms of just the tenacity with which he plays the game. I mean, I think there's quite a few players across the league that I've seen sort of recently. Actually, I think, if they weren't playing for the teams they're playing at, they fit the profile very much so of what Klopp sort of demands from his team. But just on Bowen, just before we sort of get to talk about the actual Liverpool game itself, I mean, he's obviously playing with maybe the spectre of earning a chance to go to the World Cup. Do you reckon he'll make it?
I think if you'd asked me that question about 3 weeks ago, I would have said no, to be honest. Before the international break, he had a great start to the season. He got 2 goals in Europe, but one was a penalty and the other one was just sort of his pot shot from 25 yards out. But apart from that, he hadn't been playing great. Since he's come back from, he went with the England squad for their games last month. And yeah, since coming back from that, he's been in brilliant form. I think he scored 3 in 5 or something like that. He's been excellent and, comes close to others as well. So David Moyes had said to him, look, when he came back from international duty, when you come back, go and get a few goals and, you'll be on that plane. And so far he's got 3 in 5. So yeah, if he goes on, I think West Ham have got 8 more games starting with Liverpool before that World Cup. So, if he stays fit, goes on this run of goals, and, we've seen a few players getting injured now. So I think staying fit will boost his chances alone. Staying fit, getting a lot of goals. And yeah, I think he might just sneak onto it, but he's going to have to, he's going to have to stick stick with this run of form. Now he's actually on it.
And finally, then, just actually looking at the Liverpool game itself, West Ham sort of away at Anfield. I mean, it's not been the most intimidating of sort of sides so far this season in terms of sort of the performances that Liverpool have put in. Naturally, that win over Man City last night, I think, was probably the best defensive performance as a unit I've seen from the team for definitely this season, which they looked far better as a collective, sort of that lineup of players. So, and obviously Mo Salah being moved back to a central role, lo and behold, is scoring goals again, which is always nice to see.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of how you think David Moyes will approach this game, lots has been made of obviously his record against Liverpool, his record at Anfield as well. But I mean, based upon what we have seen from Liverpool, maybe not necessarily knowing just how genuine this turning the corner is from Liverpool, how do you reckon he's going to approach it?
Well, I think that's the biggest question, is who he's got available. You know, that really sort of depends on how we can approach it. You know, I think he'll sort of be, you know, the manager who likes to have this sort of solid rear guard line, and you know, if he's not got Zuma or Dawson to do that, it's going to be very tough. I think if both of them are missing, he's going to have to go with this back five again, begrudgingly so. But I think they did do a lot of good things really against Southampton. They didn't sort of play great, but they kind of did a job. Cresswell made Cresswell made a lot of good blocks. Kehrer made a few clearances as well. Johnson did our best again, but yeah, they did all right. So I had to sort of run at them a bit, but in terms of how we're going to approach it, I think they're just going to kind of make life difficult for Liverpool, not let them sort of attack and cause problems, and try and catch them on the break. You know, with players like Bones, Skamaka, Paqueta. You know, if they start on the 4-2-3-1, or you know they'll have another extra attacker on the left. They've got their wing backs who can come forward and cause problems. So I don't think they're not a high possession team. It's very much absorb what can happen and then go for it basically. So yeah, I think in terms of how he's going to set up for this game, it's tough to predict without knowing exactly what players he's got available. But you know, he was very aware of Liverpool's threat, and I don't think he'll want to let them sort of counter and get proper runs at them. You know, with the players like, you know, Salah, Nunes, Firmino, the sort of calibre of attackers Liverpool have. You know, he's not going to want to let them have as much sort of joy as they'd like.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. I think the one area where Liverpool have struggled so far this season, maybe with the exception of sort of last night's game, is sort of dealing with negative transitions, sort of, which is ironic considering sort of that's what they used to do to everybody else in terms of sort of picking people off in those situations. They've really struggled to deal with that at times this season, not necessarily had the greatest amount of control on games from midfield. And I even remember sort of the game away to West Ham last season, just being a really great example of that in terms of, it was one of the games where Liverpool never really had control of the game from midfield. And I remember that Bowen run, just more or less running straight through midfield, not being tracked in the lead up to one of the goals. So I'm hoping that yesterday's win over City, where they sort of realised they had to track everybody and actually work for each other. Hopefully that sort of ethos has been reinstilled. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think West Ham are well set up to sort of actually exploit some of the weaknesses we've seen if they're still there. But anyway, Jonty, thanks so much for all your insight and sort of giving us an idea of sort of the expectations that West Ham have this season, and sort of the fact that these signings, it's been more thought out than maybe perhaps people would think if they didn't have any details on the players, just looked at the sheer sort of outlay, for example. I think it's clear that there's a real desire to make this much more than a flash in the pan and sort of a sustained period of success for West Ham. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
No, that's all right. Yeah, glad to be on.
And for those who are listening, this is obviously another episode of Rival Recon, and there'll be another one. I think, again, talk about being caught out by the fixture list. There's obviously another game on Saturday where Liverpool are away to Forest before the next game, which is the Champions League sort of returning against Ajax rather, on the 26th of October. So yeah, there'll be another episode this week just ahead of that Nottingham Forest game, and then we'll be back after that for the home game against Leeds right at the end of October. So do tune in for those as well. But between now and then, pay attention to all the other great sort of pods coming out on Anfield Index Pro. But between now and then, we'll see you again for Nottingham Forest.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.